Neighbors laughed when he built a second roof over his cabin until it saved him during blizzard. He was not the kind of man people noticed easily. He spoke little, kept his eyes on his work, and lived a life that most would call simple, even lonely. His cabin sat far from the main road, tucked between tall pine trees and rocky ground, where the wind always seemed to whisper stories of old winters. To him, the cabin was not just a house. It was safety, memory, and freedom built with his own hands. Years earlier, he had chosen this place on purpose. He wanted distance from noise, crowds, and fast-changing trends. Life had taught him that silence could be kinder than people. After losing his parents at a young age and spending years moving from job to job, he wanted something permanent, something he could trust. The mountains felt honest. They were harsh but predictable if you respected them. The cabin itself was small, made of thick wooden logs he cut and shaped himself. Every wall carried marks of effort and patience. He remembered how long it took to raise the first roof. Friends and neighbors helped at first, but many gave up when the work became slow and tiring. He always stayed until the job was done. That was his nature. People in the nearby settlement often wondered why he chose such a tough life. Winters were long, snow fell heavy, and help was never close. But he had grown up listening to stories from his grandfather, who survived brutal winters without modern comforts. Those stories stayed with him. They taught him that nature does not warn you loudly. It gives signs quietly, and only those who pay attention survive. He paid attention. Each year he noticed the winters changing. Snowfall grew heavier, winds became sharper, storms arrived faster and stayed longer. While others brushed it off as just another bad season, he felt something deeper shifting. He watched how snow piled up on roofs, how ice formed faster, how cold crept into walls no matter how thick they seemed. His cabin stayed warm enough, but he never felt fully satisfied. At night, as the fire crackled, he would sit silently and listen to the wind hit the roof. Sometimes it sounded angry, sometimes it sounded tired, but it always sounded powerful. And power, he believed, should never be underestimated. Neighbors often gathered at the local supply store, talking about tools, fuel, and weather. He rarely joined the conversations, but when he did, people noticed his quiet opinions. He never spoke without thinking. Once, when someone joked about how these winters aren't what they used to be, he calmly replied, "That's exactly the problem." They laughed not cruelly but casually. To them, he was overthinking things. Winters came and went. Roofs held. Life went on, but he remembered winters from his childhood. He remembered roofs collapsing under snow. He remembered neighbors losing homes in a single night. Those memories didn't fade like others did. They stayed sharp. One afternoon, while repairing a section of the roof, he noticed how unevenly the snow melted. Some parts stayed frozen longer, trapping moisture beneath. Over time, that moisture weakened the wood. It was slow damage, the kind most people never noticed until it was too late. That moment stayed in his mind long after the snow melted. He began sketching ideas on old paper at night, not complex designs, just simple thoughts. Air gaps, insulation, weight distribution. He wasn't an engineer, but he understood basics. Warm air rises, trapped air insulates. Snow needs space to slide or settle without pressure. The idea of a second roof did not come suddenly. It grew slowly, shaped by observation and memory. At first, even he questioned it. It meant extra work, extra cost, and extra attention from neighbors who already thought he was odd. But the more he thought, the more it made sense. He didn't share the idea with anyone right away. He had learned that some plans were safer when kept quiet. Instead, he tested small changes, adding thicker beams, reinforcing corners, sealing gaps more carefully than usual. Each adjustment brought him a sense of calm. Still, something felt incomplete. One evening, while sitting on the porch watching clouds roll over the mountains, he imagined a winter worse than any before. Snow piling up for days, winds howling non-stop, temperatures dropping so low that even strong walls struggled to hold warmth. In that picture, he saw his cabin standing, but only because he had prepared. That night, he made his decision. He would build a second roof, not because he wanted attention, not because he wanted to prove anyone wrong, but because he believed survival was not about being brave in danger. It was about being ready before danger arrived. When he finally began gathering materials, people noticed. Extra wood, extra beams, extra insulation sheets. Questions followed quickly. "What are you building now?" someone asked with a smile. "Just improving the cabin," he replied. When they saw the second roof frame taking shape above the first, laughter followed, not harsh but loud enough to sting. Some shook their heads. Others joked about him preparing for a storm that would never come. He did not respond. He kept working. Inside, though, his mind stayed calm. He knew laughter did not change weather. Opinions did not stop snow. Only preparation mattered. As days passed, the structure slowly rose. The space between the two roofs remained carefully measured. He worked with patience, checking every joint twice. His hands grew sore, but his focus never wavered. Each nail felt like a promise to himself. At night, he slept deeply, tired but satisfied. He felt aligned with his instincts again. The cabin no longer felt vulnerable. It felt ready. Winter was coming, and whether others believed it or not, he trusted the signs. This was only the beginning. The work did not stop once the decision was made. In fact, it became more serious. Each morning, he woke up before sunrise, pulling on thick gloves and stepping outside while the air was still sharp and quiet. The mountains stood tall and still, as if watching him. He liked that feeling. It reminded him that every action mattered. Building the second roof was not simple. It was not just placing wood on top of wood. He had to think about balance, airflow, weight, and strength. The space between the two roofs needed to be wide enough to trap warm air, but not so wide that it weakened the structure. He measured carefully, using old tools that had served him for years. He trusted them because he had learned their limits. At the supply store, people started paying more attention to him. At first, they only noticed the extra materials in his truck. Then they noticed the way he asked questions about insulation, wind resistance, and load pressure. Some of the workers raised their eyebrows. Others smiled politely. A few quietly respected his seriousness, even if they didn't fully understand his plan. Word spread quickly in a small community. Soon, everyone knew about the second roof. Jokes followed him wherever he went. Some said he was building a hat for his cabin. Others teased that he was planning to survive 100 winters. Most meant no harm, but each laugh reminded him that standing alone often came with noise. He never argued. He never explained. He believed that if something truly made sense, it did not need defending. He had learned that lesson the hard way in life. Many times before, he had wasted energy trying to convince people who never planned to listen. Instead, he focused on the work. The weather stayed calm at first, almost peaceful. Clear skies and soft winds made the work easier. But he noticed small signs that others ignored. Mornings grew colder earlier. Frost stayed longer on the ground. Birds moved differently. The mountains had their own language, and he listened closely. One afternoon, as he balanced on the roof frame, a neighbor stopped by. The man leaned against a fence and watched quietly for a while. "You really think it's necessary?" the neighbor asked. He paused, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I think it's better to be ready," the neighbor shrugged. "Winters come and go. Sometimes they don't go the same way they came," he replied calmly. The neighbor laughed and walked away. But the question lingered in the air, as if it wanted an answer from the future. As the structure took shape, the second roof began to look less strange and more solid. Thick beams created a strong outer shell. He left small gaps on purpose, allowing air to move in controlled ways. He sealed edges carefully, knowing that wind always looked for weakness. At night, he reviewed his work in his mind. He imagined snow falling, layer by layer, pressing down. He imagined heat rising from the cabin, caught gently between the two roofs instead of escaping into the cold sky. The idea comforted him. It felt right. Money became tight. Extra materials cost more than he had planned. He sold a few old tools he no longer used and cut back on supplies. He told himself that comfort could wait, safety could not. Each choice was made with care. Some evenings, doubt tried to creep in. He would sit alone by the fire, listening to distant winds and wondering if he had gone too far. Maybe the neighbors were right. Maybe he was building something unnecessary. But then he remembered the sound of roofs breaking under heavy snow. He remembered the cold that seeped into bones. Those memories were stronger than doubt. As weeks passed, the laughter slowly changed. It didn't stop, but it softened. People noticed that he never rushed, that he never complained, that every piece fit exactly where it should. Some even admitted quietly that the roof looked strong. One younger man stopped by one day and asked how the air gap worked. He explained simply, without pride. The man listened closely, nodding. That small moment felt meaningful. not because he needed approval, but because someone was learning to think ahead. The first light snowfall arrived earlier than expected. It was thin and gentle, barely covering the ground. Children played in it. Neighbors brushed it off their steps without concern. But he watched carefully. He climbed up and observed how the snow settled on both roofs. Just as he expected, the outer roof carried most of the weight, while the inner roof stayed dry and warm. That night, the cabin felt different, warmer, quieter. The wind's sound was softer, less sharp. He slept deeply, without the usual worry pressing on his chest. As winter drew closer, storms were mentioned more often on the radio. Reports spoke of colder fronts moving in, of systems forming far away. Most people shrugged. Weather reports came and went, but he listened carefully, memorizing patterns. He finished the final reinforcements just in time. The second roof stood firm, clean, and ready. It did not look fancy. It looked serious, purposeful. On the day he packed away his tools, he stood back and studied the cabin. It looked different now, taller, stronger, like it had grown armor. He felt a quiet sense of peace settle inside him. Neighbors still joked. Some asked if he expected the end of the world. He smiled politely and said nothing. He knew better than to argue with comfort. Deep down, though, he felt something else, an uneasy calm. The kind that comes before a test, the kind that tells you something important is approaching. The mountains grew quieter, the air heavier. Snow clouds gathered slowly, like they were waiting for the right moment. Winter was no longer just coming. It was preparing. The storm did not arrive suddenly. It crept in quietly, almost politely, as if giving everyone time to underestimate it. The morning sky looked heavy but calm. Snow fell softly at first, light flakes drifting down like feathers. People went about their day as usual, clearing paths, feeding animals, and warming their homes. No one felt afraid yet. He noticed the change early. The air felt thicker when he stepped outside. The wind moved in short, sharp bursts instead of steady flows. The mountains looked closer than usual, their tops hidden behind low clouds. These were signs he had seen before, signs that meant the storm was not just passing through. By afternoon, snow began to fall faster. Roads slowly disappeared beneath white layers. The radio crackled with warnings, but the voices sounded unsure, as if even they did not yet understand what was coming. He filled extra containers with water, checked his firewood, and made sure all doors were sealed tightly. His movements were calm, almost routine. As night fell, the wind rose. It no longer whispered. It pushed. It pressed against the cabin with force, testing every corner. Snow hit the outer roof hard, sliding and piling up. Inside, the cabin remained warm. The fire burned steadily. The space between the two roofs did its work quietly, holding heat like a hidden blanket. Elsewhere, worry began to grow. Lights flickered in nearby cabins. Some people stepped outside to check their roofs, brushing off snow as best they could. Laughter faded. Jokes stopped. The storm no longer felt playful. By midnight, snowfall became heavy and non-stop. The wind howled like something alive, circling the cabins, finding weak points. He sat by the window for a while, watching shadows move across the snow. He did not sleep much, but he did not feel fear. He felt alert. The first roof failure happened before dawn. A loud crack echoed through the valley, followed by silence. Then another sound, wood giving way. Someone's roof had collapsed under the weight of snow and ice. Soon after, a radio message confirmed it. No injuries, but the home was badly damaged. He closed his eyes briefly, not in relief, but in understanding. This was exactly what he had prepared for. The storm grew stronger with each passing hour. Snow piled higher than fences. Wind knocked over trees. Roads became impossible to travel. Power lines snapped under ice. Darkness spread across the valley. Inside his cabin, the temperature stayed steady. The outer roof carried the weight of the storm, while the inner roof stayed dry and protected. Snow collected above, but pressure spread evenly instead of pushing downward. Moisture stayed outside. Heat stayed in. He moved carefully, conserving energy. He cooked simple meals, fed the fire, and checked the structure often. Occasionally, he climbed into the air gap area to make sure nothing had shifted. Everything held firm. In other cabins, things were not going as well. Cold crept into walls. Snow forced its way through cracks. Some roofs began to bend under the pressure. People tried to shovel snow away, but the wind filled the cleared spaces within minutes. Effort became useless against the storm's strength. Emergency messages filled the radio, requests for help. Reports of blocked doors and frozen pipes. Some people left their homes, seeking shelter where they could. Others stayed, hoping the storm would weaken soon. It did not. The blizzard reached its peak on the second day. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Wind screamed through the valley nonstop. Snow fell sideways upward in every direction at once. Time felt slow, stretched thin by the constant sound of the storm. He stayed inside, trusting his work. At times, the wind struck so hard that the cabin shook slightly. Each time he paused and listened. The sound never changed. There was no cracking, no groaning of wood. The structure absorbed the force and held. That night he heard something new, footsteps outside. At first he thought it was the wind playing tricks on him. Then he heard a knock, weak, careful. He opened the door to find two neighbors covered in snow, faces pale from cold and exhaustion. Their cabin had lost heat. Ice had formed inside. They had walked as far as they could. Without hesitation, he welcomed them inside. The warmth surprised them. One of them stared up at the ceiling, noticing the silence. No dripping, no cold drafts, just steady heat and calm air. "How is it so warm?" one asked. He simply said, "The roof helps." They rested, drank warm water, and slept safely through the night. He gave them blankets and space, never mentioning the laughter from weeks earlier. There was no need. By morning, more damage reports came through. Several cabins were no longer safe. Rescue teams struggled to reach people because roads were completely buried. The storm had cut the valley off from the outside world. He shared what he had: food, warmth, shelter. His cabin became a quiet island in the chaos, protected by simple ideas and careful work. As the blizzard continued, word spread. People who could still travel carefully made their way to his place. He never turned anyone away. The cabin held. The second roof did exactly what it was meant to do. Outside, snow continued to pile up, but inside, life remained steady. The trapped air between the roofs acted like a shield, slowing heat loss and preventing ice buildup. While others fought the storm, his cabin endured it. When the storm finally began to weaken, it did so slowly. Winds softened. Snowfall thinned. The valley emerged buried but alive. He stepped outside after days indoors. The outer roof was heavy with snow but strong. The inner roof remained untouched. He placed his hand against the wall and felt warmth inside. Around him, the damage was clear: bent roofs. Broken structures, people standing quietly taking in what had happened. No one laughed anymore. They looked at his cabin differently now, not with surprise, with respect. And he knew, without needing to say a word, that preparation had made all the difference. When the storm began to lose its strength, it did not leave quickly. It pulled back slowly, like a tired giant that was not ready to let go. The wind softened first, dropping from a roar to a long, restless sigh. Snow still fell, but lighter now, settling instead of attacking. The valley stayed silent, as if everyone was holding their breath. Inside the cabin, people were waking up one by one. Stiff bodies, tired faces, quiet voices. They had slept safely, but the days of fear had left marks on everyone. He moved calmly among them, placing more wood on the fire, warming water, offering simple food. No one rushed. No one complained. They were just thankful to be warm. Outside, the world looked unfamiliar. Snow had reshaped everything. Paths were gone, fences were buried, trees leaned under heavy white weight. Some cabins nearby looked wounded, their roofs bent or broken, walls dark with cold. It was clear that the storm had tested every home, and many had failed that test. One neighbor stepped outside with him, carefully pushing snow aside with a boot. The man stared at the second roof for a long time, eyes moving from the outer layer to the space beneath. "I didn't understand before," the neighbor said quietly. He nodded, not as agreement, but as acknowledgement. There was nothing to explain now. The storm had already done that work. As daylight grew stronger, more people gathered outside his cabin. Some had stayed with him through the worst of it. Others arrived once the winds weakened enough to travel short distances. They came slowly, tired and careful, carrying fear and relief in equal measure. He listened as they talked among themselves. Stories of long nights, cold rooms, strange noises in the dark. One family spoke of snow pushing through their ceiling. Another talked about the sound of wood bending, the fear that came with every strong gust. These were not dramatic stories. They were quiet, heavy ones. Rescue teams tried to reach the area, but the roads were still blocked. Everyone knew it would take time. Until then, they had only each other. His cabin became a place of quiet gathering, not loud, not crowded, just steady. People warmed their hands, shared food, and rested. Children sat close to the fire, eyes wide, listening to the adults speak in low voices. More than once, someone looked up at the ceiling and shook their head in disbelief. The inner roof was dry. No ice, no dripping water, no cold air slipping through. "How did you know?" someone finally asked. He thought for a moment before answering. "I didn't know," he said. "I just listened." That answer stayed with them. As the hours passed, people began helping one another. Snow was cleared from doors. Small repairs were made where possible. Tools were shared. No one laughed anymore. No one teased. The storm had erased those habits. Late that afternoon, a loud cracking sound echoed across the valley. Everyone froze. It came from one of the damaged cabins nearby. Another roof had finally given in, collapsing under snow that had been weakened by days of pressure. Thankfully, no one was inside. Still, the sound reminded everyone how close danger still was. They moved faster after that. Some families decided to stay together in the strongest homes. Others remained with him. No one argued. Decisions were made quietly with care. Survival had changed the way people spoke to each other. That evening, as the sky cleared for the first time in days, stars appeared faintly above the valley. Cold returned, sharp and biting, but without the wild wind. The storm was finally stepping back. He stood outside alone for a moment, looking up. The second roof cast a long shadow in the snow. He remembered every hour he had spent building it, every laugh he had ignored, every doubt he had pushed aside. Inside, people were safe because of that choice. The next morning, rescue vehicles finally broke through the roads. Their arrival brought relief but also surprise. The damage was worse than expected. Many homes needed repairs before people could return safely. Some would take weeks. Rescue workers inspected his cabin carefully. One of them tapped the outer roof, impressed by its strength. Another asked questions about the design. He answered simply, without pride. "It's not complicated," he said. "It just gives the storm somewhere to go." Word spread quickly after that, not in an excited way, but in a respectful one. People spoke about preparation differently now. They talked about listening, observing, thinking ahead. The storm had changed more than buildings. It had changed minds. As help continued, people began returning to what was left of their homes. They thanked him quietly. Some shook his hand. Others simply nodded. He accepted it all without emotion. He had not built the roof for thanks. That night, when the cabin was quiet again, he sat alone by the fire. The silence felt different now. Not lonely, full. He thought about how close things had come to being worse. How thin the line was between comfort and danger. He felt no fear, only respect for nature, for patience, for preparation. Outside, snow rested peacefully on the outer roof. Inside, warmth stayed where it belonged. The storm had tested everyone. But it had proven one thing clearly. Thinking ahead was not foolish. It was survival. When the last rescue vehicle left and the valley slowly returned to its quiet state, life did not go back to how it was before. Something invisible had shifted. The storm had passed, but its lessons stayed behind, settling into people's thoughts like snow that refuses to melt. The days after were filled with work. Roofs needed fixing. Walls needed drying. Paths had to be cleared again and again. He helped where he could, not because anyone asked, but because that was how he lived. He carried wood, shared tools, and showed others how to strengthen weak spots in their homes. He spoke little, but when he did, people listened closely. No one laughed now. People who once teased him watched carefully as he explained simple ideas. How air could protect warmth. How weight could be spread instead of forced downward. How small changes made early could prevent big problems later. He never acted like a teacher. He spoke as someone sharing experience, not advice. One neighbor decided to rebuild his roof with a small gap, inspired by what he had seen. Another added extra support beams before the next snowfall. Even those who could not afford changes began paying closer attention to signs: wind direction, snowfall patterns, temperature drops. The storm had taught them that ignoring nature came with a cost. As weeks passed, the valley slowly healed. Snow melted in places touched by sunlight. Roofs were repaired. Children returned to playing outside. Laughter came back too, but it was different now, softer, more careful. His cabin stood unchanged. The second roof remained, quiet and strong, no longer strange to anyone. It had become part of the landscape, like it had always belonged there. Sometimes visitors stopped by just to look at it. They asked questions. They wanted to understand. He welcomed them politely, answered simply, and returned to his work. Attention still made him uncomfortable, but he accepted it with patience. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, a neighbor sat beside him on the porch. "You saved more than just your cabin," the neighbor said. He shook his head gently. "I just built a roof." "But it made people think," the neighbor replied. That stayed with him. Winter slowly loosened its grip, but it did not disappear completely. Cold nights remained. Snow still fell now and then, but no one feared it the same way anymore. Preparation had replaced panic. He returned to his quiet routines, fixing small things, chopping wood, watching the sky. Life felt steady again, yet inside him there was a calm satisfaction, not pride, just peace. He thought about how close he had come to giving up on the idea. How easy it would have been to listen to laughter and choose comfort instead of effort. That thought reminded him that the hardest choices were often made alone. One afternoon, a young boy from the settlement stopped by. He looked up at the cabin with curiosity. "Why did you build two roofs?" the boy asked. He smiled softly. "So the cold wouldn't feel so welcome." The boy laughed and ran off, but the question mattered. Curiosity had replaced doubt. As spring approached, the valley looked cleaner, quieter. The storm became a story people told, not with fear, but with respect. And every time the story reached the part about the second roof, voices changed. They slowed. They softened, not because it was clever, because it was simple. He never changed his ways. He didn't expand the cabin further or seek praise. He remained the same quiet man, living by observation and patience. But now, when he walked into the supply store, people greeted him differently, with nods, with genuine smiles. The mountains remained tall and silent. Winters would come again, storms would return. He knew that, but he also knew something else. Preparation was not about expecting disaster, it was about respecting possibility. As the seasons turned, the second roof stayed where it was, ready, waiting, unnoticed by those who understood its purpose. It no longer needed to prove anything. The laughter had faded. What remained was understanding. And in the quiet mountain valley, that understanding was worth more than any words.